You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. On today's program, I want to tackle the very important concept of you can change the future. And by that, I mean, look, it's obvious that America and the world is rushing headlong into the apocalypse, if you will. It's just moving in an ever-increasing acceleration into self-destruction. You know it and I know it. There have been a number of very good things and optimistic signs. Let's just take one coming right out of the gate. People, prior to the election of President Trump, people were, especially on the conservative side, were in despair, despondent, depressed, disillusioned, more than disillusioned. There was a sense of hopelessness eroding the confidence of people who were Christians and conservatives and so on and so forth. Why? Because despite all their efforts, their hard work, their spending of monies, their sacrificing of time, despite all of that, they kept coming up empty. They were participating in the election process, but they were never seeing the leaders installed that would protect their rights, their economy, their right to a living, etc. And so it was a very disillusioning process. And especially since we had a number of years, and I'm not trying to make a partisan comment here, I'm just observing as non-biased as I possibly can. But I'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to notice that when Biden was president, a lot of very important things that affect the future of our nation and individual liberties for both the left and the right were literally, and pardon the expression, flushed down the toilet. Now, again, when I was a kid, I was raised in a secular, humanist, existentialist home where lots of very smart people came through our household. Iron sharpens iron. But all of them back then, this was, when I was a young kid, many, many moons ago in New York City, the people that visited my parents, they would have all considered themselves to be liberals in the classical sense of the word. They didn't consider themselves to be, quote, leftists or communists or socialists. They were liberals, and they were not conservatives. And the reason they were liberals was because they believed in things like free speech. So whether they agreed with you or not, they vehemently believed that no matter what you said, whether they liked it or not, that you had a legal right to say it in a free society. In other words, freedom of speech. They took that very seriously. That no government, no other group of people could impose their will upon you and take away your freedom of speech. And so every liberal, today you might call them leftists, every leftist, every liberal back then believed in freedom of speech. And they believed in getting educated, and they believed in learning not just, stuff to get a job, but learning a certain amount of liberal arts so that you could discuss the higher level things in life, like philosophy and culture and art and literature, because whether you want to admit it or not, those things directly impact all the other things. Now, way back then, in the time machine, at that time when I was growing up and I was a kid, I was going into elementary school. At that time, there were no outrageous, crazy courses like, and this is not a racist slur, African American studies, environmental studies. You say, well, those things are good things. Well, they may be good things, but they're not being taught in an objective manner. They're being taught with an inherent bias. Something that is taught with an inherent bias is propaganda. It's not an education. So at least back then, there was a affirmation of having intelligence and research behind what you claim to be true. All right. So having said that, it was an environment where a lot of writers could get published, a lot of thinkers could think and express it publicly. It was an environment, if you look back to the early 1960s, if you look back to the late 50s and 70s, and then it starts to dwindle down in the 70s, moving into the 80s, liberalism, classical liberalism, and people who would be classical liberals would have been people like John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy would probably agree with a majority of things, or a great deal of things, that conservatives believe in today. But today, there has been a philosophical march to suicide. There has been a philosophical progression into a form of intellectual insanity where all the rules of classic liberalism and learning have been chucked out the window. And what have they been replaced with? Well, it's worse than that. They haven't just been replaced with this and that and the other. If you know what's going on, and I've spent a lifetime trying to educate people as to what's going on through my books and talks, etc. If you really know what's going on, America, I'm going to say it. I've said it in my books for decades, and I'm going to say it once again over social media. It needs to be said because this intensive truth is critical to understanding what's happening in our world. And quite frankly, a very small percentage of people among the conservative group and the liberal group understand what I'm about to share with you. America was infiltrated by hardcore Marxist leftists who had a plan in their own words. They published their plan. So this is not, somebody speaking from an attitude of non-rational paranoia, somebody who can be dismissed as, being a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm talking to you based on the witness of historical fact and documentation, okay? America was infiltrated by secret, covert groups like the Frankfurt Marxists who infiltrated our school systems, our churches, and revolutionized them with Marxist principles. But the reason they got away with it is they simply changed the vocabulary. They simply changed the verbiage. They changed the wording of the Marxist principles, and they made the Marxist principles sound as if they were democratic, intellectual, or even Christian principles. So they infiltrated academia, the university system, college system. Let's look at that very quickly. Everywhere I go, I'm constantly meeting several generations of young people. Sometimes many of these several generations of young people came from Christian homes and were raised by people who would essentially be called true Christians, who exposed their children to the Word of God. And however imperfect they may have been, they gave 100% effort in attempting to raise their kids to be Christians. However, since there was hardly anybody there to warn them, there was hardly any watchman on the wall in existence, this covert group of people like the Frankfurt School Marxists and agents for the Tavistock group. I was on Doug Hagman's show the other day, and we were talking about all these secret groups that were plotting to take over America by transforming the minds of the youth. And he brought up, and I've written about this group a lot in a lot of my books, but it was important that Doug brought out the Tavistock group as a critical transformation agent. The Tavistock group was created in London, Great Britain. It began at World War I. It continued on through World War II. And the Tavistock group originally was created to treat military soldiers from Great Britain fighting in both World War I and World War II who were shot or had explosives or cannons or missiles or other explosive devices detonate all around them. When the detonation occurred, the soldiers would go into a state of shock psychologically. The explosion caused a psychological shock. And so conventional treatment, the soldiers didn't respond to conventional treatments. They had to be taken to specialized clinics that could treat military soldiers that were afflicted with what was known later on as post-traumatic stress disorder, PSTD. But initially, these clinics focused in on the negative effects of being exposed to shock detonations on the battlefield. And the shock detonations created a weird state of altered consciousness in the soldiers, which the Tavistock Institute began to treat. And so Tavistock Institute was essentially created at its very beginning to treat soldiers who suffered from various forms of shock syndrome, shock causing a chain reaction of PSTD. So what they also discovered was that when a soldier was afflicted by PSTD due to explosive shocks on the battlefield, detonations, this kicked them into an altered state of consciousness, and it could cause nightmares, paranoia, isolation, fear, anxiety, insomnia, physical illnesses, all kinds of mental illnesses. There would be a whole cascade of psychological problems that could easily occur to a soldier when he was exposed to detonation shock on the battlefield. Also, when a shock occurred on the battlefield via a detonation, this opened the doorway in the minds of soldiers so that you could, if you wanted to, you could, if you were evil, exploit the shock syndrome that the soldier was suffering from. Scientifically, when a soldier is exposed to various shock syndromes in the battlefield, you can use that then, if you have devious goals, you can use that as a method of entering the subconscious minds of the soldier and programming the soldier to do any number of things on a subconscious level. This is the basis for what later became scientific mind control. Scientific mind control is usually or most often created via the scientific formula known as pain. Pain can equal shock. Pain can equal shock. So when I say to you, what causes PSTD? You have pain, or shock, which equals pain. A violent shock on the battlefield is the psychological, biological equivalent of pain. So when you implement the countdown formula of pain, drugs, and hypnosis, you can, when a soldier has gone through the experience of shock and is suffering from PSTD, there exists a kind of doorway into their subconscious mind that can be exploited through things like MK Ultra programming. Because MK Ultra programming, developed by such figures as Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, MK Ultra programming was also developed and furthered by the CIA mind control. MK Ultra was also developed by the Nazi mind control scientists in Nazi Germany. So a number of groups perfected MK Ultra programming. And again, the basic countdown formula for programming a person in their subconscious mind is called pain, drugs, and hypnosis. Pain could be shock. Drugs are a psychedelic drug administered to the potential victim of MK Ultra. A psychedelic drug like LSD or mescaline can further open the doors that allows for programming. Pain, drugs, and hypnosis. Hypnosis is any number of technologies, especially verbal technologies, that use the array of things like repetitive phrases or slogans, which function as hypnotic phrases and slogans, programming you through repetition in your sleep, utilizing theta frequencies in your sleep to repeatedly expose your subconscious mind to some kind of verbal message. So this is, and then music, rock and roll music, certain films, any number of media inputs can provide an avenue for the hypnotic programming necessary for MK Ultra programming. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So what happened, in short, and if you don't believe me, then you need to be able to defend your own arguments. When people look at you like you're crazy, and I guarantee you they will, because you're not going along with their dumbed-down program. They feel threatened, so they lash out at you. They think that they can establish their credibility or establish their intelligence by trying to one-up you in some kind of argument in a social setting of whatever kind. So the key thing here is you got to be able to know your stuff. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to have some bullet points nailed down that you understand so that you can fire back even without thinking. And then you disarm them. Then they shut up and they scurry away like scared rabbits, which they should. You shouldn't allow people who don't really know what they're talking about to intimidate you. You need to take control of the situation in a social environment, in a job environment, and a debate environment. The name of the game is act very calm, very serene, very cool. Don't look like you're suppressing intense emotion. Look like you're ultra calm. Nothing phases you. If you can get in touch with that part of yourself, if you can get in touch with that part of yourself through prayer or whatever, then when you're interacting with people, they will become unnerved around you because you will be able to say things that are, outrageous to them, but you don't blink an eye. You're walking around in a serene, peaceful state. So even if they angrily fire back at you, You don't get defensive. You don't get caught up in that drama. By staying serene, by staying peaceful, by not allowing yourself to be baited by their traps, you then strategically establish a supremacy in the conversation or the debate. It's a non-verbal battle in which one person or the other is going to triumph. Now, if you allow yourself to go down and lose, how do you think that affects your ability to witness to people for Jesus Christ? I'll tell you what it does. It kills any viable opportunity to share your faith. Because if people perceive you as kind of a gullible conspiracy theorist moron because you don't know what you're talking about, you're not going to win them to the Lord later on. So the key is learning how to speak, and then your nonverbal presentation. Calm, serene, not phased, not threatened at all. And you can work on that, and that's what you should project. And then when you do that, you will win the so-called debate. Okay, so all of this programming, let's get down to it. So in my books, it took me a lifetime to knit this together. It's like it came before me over decade after decade after decade, like a series of abstract puzzle pieces, like a giant puzzle consisting of thousands and thousands of puzzle pieces. And then ironically, it became my job privately to try to assemble all the diverse puzzle pieces into a meaningful, communicative whole. In other words, the puzzle piece could no longer remain abstract. The puzzle piece had to finally form itself as a very clear photographic or artistic image that was projecting a very clear and meaningful representation of reality. So it took a long time, but I was called to do it so that I could help people like you, so that I could equip people like you. Because not everybody has the time to do this, or the gifting, or the inclination. And by the way, in the real world, I hate puzzle pieces. They bore me to tears. Okay, so in order to understand what's going on in our world right now, because things are happening in an accelerated mode, things seem to be getting faster and faster and faster. I don't think that's just some subjective perception on my part or your part. I've heard people say this over and over again. I've been very skeptical about publicly agreeing with them. But the fact of the matter is that privately, I have this sense, and I'm still evaluating it, but I have this sense that I'm not saying from the standpoint of physics that time is actually moving faster. I don't think that's the case. I suspect that the impact is psychological, so that it appears based on psychological perception, it appears based on subjective perception that time is moving us faster and faster into the future. And I'm still examining that and researching that. Okay, so after many decades of writing books, which again, I'm telling you, you should get because you should get them, because you should have knowledge which grants you power. If you don't have knowledge, you don't have power. Plus, I promise you, it will grow your intelligence. It will grow your perception. It will equip you to be a formidable presenter of the truth that doesn't get shot down and defeated all the time. So, books like The Babylon Code that I wrote with Troy Anderson, Power from On High, Mass Awakening that Doug Hagman wrote the foreword to, The Day the Dollar Died, The Greatest Battle in the History of the World for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind, The Warning, Standing Down Goliath, Are You Ready? Who Will Rule the Future? From Earthquakes to Global Unity, Countdown to Armageddon. This is interesting. All of these books are written for the purpose of ministry and evangelism. Every book is designed to function like a tract, a religious tract. But a lot of people like me, I don't read religious tracts because I assume they're stupid. That doesn't mean God can't use them, because he definitely does. But these books are sophisticated religious tracts. They can change, they can win people to Christ, they can set them free, they can do all kinds of things because they're written in a fast-moving, fast contemporary style. So I was at an event where a lot of people that I knew were there relatively recently. Or if I didn't know them, other people knew them. So there was like a barbecue at this event, and I was sitting down with this couple that were, I'm guessing they were in their mid-30s, okay? And the girl that was sitting there, she had gotten one of my books many years ago. And the book that she had gotten, she requested it, was called Countdown to Armageddon, that I wrote. And She had never told me the story. I kind of bumped into her via friends occasionally, but she had never told me this feedback ever. But as we were sitting there talking, and I was just about to leave with my wife because we'd been there for a number of hours, she decided to tell me what happened with my book, Countdown to Armageddon, that she read. And I'll give you, it blew my mind. I'll give you a real micro short version of what happened. So she was she was assigned to write a book report on a book that dealt with all kinds of global economics, cryptocurrencies, a global economic system, et cetera, et cetera. And the assignment was given to her by the professor of the secular university that she was attending. Okay? So it was a secular university, a secular professor, and they are not usually friendly towards anything that remotely talks about the Bible or Bible prophecy. So she based her required report, she used my book, Countdown to Armageddon, as her primary source, because everything that I said in Countdown to Armageddon is documented through firsthand sources. And so she did an extensive, I don't know whether it was a term paper report or whatever they call those things in college. And she also put it together with a book report on Countdown to Armageddon. So this book, Countdown to Armageddon, like my other books, I mean, it talks about everything. Terminator seeds, manufactured weather. Let's see. And the copyright for this book is, what was it? The year 2000. So here I am, once again, 25 years ago, talking about all this stuff that many conservatives are looking to, the new wave of celebrities at the top of the pyramid of the alternative social media structure. But most of them have found out about these subjects literally only in the last 2, 3 years or 4 years. Now, I don't fault them for that, and I thank God that they finally got up to speed. But you can hardly consider them experts when they just found out about the topic 2 years ago. This is just one example of one book that I wrote where it was written 25 years ago. 25 years ago, for crying out loud. And I'm looking at the table of contents. And first chapter is at the end of the world as we know it. Stormy weather, death by volcanoes, disease crisis, like pandemics, famines, decline of the family, attacks on privacy, clueless on terrorism, drugs, the occult, and declining morality, the quantum shift, the Antichrist, NATO, Kosovo, and global government, one world, an idea whose time has come, Europe united, China's kings of the East, the fall of the Babylon. Such has not occurred until now, the Great Tribulation, on the road to Armageddon, the day of the Lord, when they say peace and safety. Who then is a faithful servant? All this stuff, and the opening chapter begins with me driving in my car driving towards northern Los Angeles County and looking up and seeing the giant Hale-Bopp comet that was up there for months. So, this book talks about all kinds of prophetic, scientific, economic subjects. It talks about all kinds of scientific analysis of climate change and the Terminator seeds, which are genetically modified seeds, and all kinds of stuff. And so I'm looking at it, and this is what she's using as her primary source. Mark of the Beast technology, biochip implants, computer chips inside of the skin, bioimplants. And I write here, they are literally still just discovering and debating over this truth today and this past year and maybe the last 2 or 3 years before that. So, but at the current moment, our society, including Christians and conservatives, are debating as to whether or not the following is true. But I dealt with it 25 years ago in my book, Countdown to Armageddon, where I write, and I develop it more than just in a one-line sentence, but to just give you a hint, I write that a whole new system of bioimplants. Basically, this new biochip technology consists of a passive or active bioimplant. A passive bioimplant is something like an ATM card strip, in that it can be scanned and then deliver certain information such as name, address, social security, health information, banking information. The other kind of bioimplant has its own internal electronics. Listen carefully. The other bioimplant has its own internal electronics. Okay, now listen even more carefully. It has its own internal electronics, which can send out an electronic signal. So what I'm telling you 25 years ago in my book, Countdown to Armageddon, I'm talking about the reality of living bioimplants put into the human bloodstream that have the capacity to beam a wireless electronic signal from a human body due to the biochip implant. Okay, so this technology, I was attacked viciously for declaring this as a truth for over a decade or 2 decades. Yet what I wrote, and I go into a lot more detail in this book, what I wrote, not only was it true, I documented it in my book, and I stated it 25 years before anybody else even was aware of the fact that the human body had already been converted into a electromagnetic frequency broadcaster and an electromagnetic frequency receiver. And I remember doing an interview. This is a long time ago. I was doing an interview for the Discovery Channel on my book, The Mark of the Beast. The biochip, no, it's the chip implant, The Mark of the Beast. So I was doing an interview in the Discovery Channel studios in Hollywood, and they wanted to nail me down in a way so they could embarrass me and discredit me. They wanted to nail me down and manipulate what I had said so that I would be discredited. Now, they had one of their big producers that I believe this producer functioned as the entire entertainment industry, the news media industry, has been infiltrated by intelligence agencies for decades. It's called Operation Mockingbird. It's a published fact. It's not some obscure conspiracy theory. It's a fact. So you have people that are producers and writers and on-camera celebrities who are, in fact, secretly intelligence agencies. So this guy was very bright and very sharp. So we were having the preliminary, verbal dance of chatty conversation in which he was trying to feel me out. I mean that in a business discussion way. And I was trying to get a lock into what he was all about. So we sit down in a boardroom where they decide to shoot the segments with me. And the boardroom has a very large table with chairs on each side. And he begins to ask me questions. So as the interview goes on, the next thing I discover as I look up around me and I'm looking in his eyes to answer his questions, is that the boardroom has slowly filled up with more and more people. And now there's not just one camera on me or 2 cameras on me. There's now a total of 5 different cameras on me, which is a very I can see 2, maybe if you stretch it 3, but 5 cameras on me with a cameraman on each camera. So 5 different cameras taking video of me from 5 different angles, close up from the left, the right, and anything you wanted. They wanted to capture every nuance and every motion, every batting of the eye, because they were planning on tripping me up, and they wanted to make sure that they grabbed it lock, stock, and barrel by setting me up with 5 cameras to videotape me. And that meant 5 different directors of photography, all shooting video at the same time of me. And then they pull out the book, and then I noticed that the friendliness tone of the conversation begins to fade between me and the host, who's also, I suspect, is a double agent. But I notice he's getting more aggressive in his examination of me. It's supposed to be an interview. I told them what I think. I sent him a copy of my book. There was no surprises. But he wanted to manipulate what I said so that it would become exaggerated for the purpose of discrediting it and ridicule. Now, I've been around the block in media, big media circles for a long time. As a producer, as a guest expert, as a host of my own show. So I know how the game works, and I am very hyper aware of what's going on all around me. And I'm also aware, even though I choose not to let my antagonists know this, but I'm also highly aware when I am covertly being set up for a takedown, or am being covertly set up to be ridiculed. I'm very aware of it because I can smell it coming, and I know how it works psychologically when they're 2 minutes out from me on a takedown. It's like another kind of puzzle piece that just flows together inside my brain. And so I employ kind of a psychological jujitsu, a psychological karate against my opponents, all the while pretending to be slightly dumb. So I pretend to be very savvy and smart in terms of being a guest expert on any given field. I don't surrender that. But when it comes to the social dynamics, when it comes to being set up psychologically and camera-wise for a takedown, I go into my mode of pretending to be somewhat naive, not stupid, but I pretend to be naive about the dynamics of how one is taken down and what you can do in terms of psychological karate to defend yourself. I pretend to be naive. By pretending to be naive about the sinister nature of their interview, this disarms them because they think, see, I trapped them deliberately in their own pride. They think that I don't know what they're doing. And as long as I can maintain the illusion to convince them to believe that I don't know what they're doing, they will be more apt to make mistakes. They will be overly aggressive, and with very little intervention from me, they will trip and fall into their own trap. You got it? Look, don't judge me. This is how the savvy, upscale game of high stakes, major mainstream mass media is played. If you don't know how to play the game and you can't survive in that game environment, it's over. Go back to the early versions of Donald Trump when he was doing, what was the show when he was the big shot executive and he'd say, "You're fired." You know what show I'm talking about. I just can't remember the name. But they employed and showed that thing in a big way. Okay, so he is now, he's blowing his cover because he's revealing the fact that there's something weird going on. He's overly pushy, overly aggressive. And because he's overly pushy and overly aggressive regarding this discussion on the microchip implant, that in effect becomes his tell. Now, most of you know what the term tell means in gambling and poker, etc. A tell is that when you're sitting at a poker table or whatever, and you're trying to bluff everybody around you that you really have a good hand, but in reality you have a crummy hand, you adopt your poker face, which is a face that is supposed to project confidence, even if you have nothing to be confident about. Now, in poker or gambling verbiage, and I'm not a gambler, but I know something about it, and I've played the game. In poker verbiage, if your body, if your words, like the faltering of your voice, hiccuping, batting your eyes, all of a sudden you're batting your eyes like crazy, wiggling in your seat, a slight stutter. All of this is slight. Most people have, when they're under high level pressure, most people who are trying to conceal the fact that they are under high level pressure will communicate that they're secretly nervous and secretly scared about something. That psychological communication that they exhibit, that they don't often realize they're exhibiting, is known as the tell. So some people have a tell that whenever they're telling a lie or whenever they're, making something up, they'll run their fingers very quickly through their hair, from the top of their head back towards the backside of the top of the head. That's the tell. Another tell is you sniff. I mean, the number of tells could be infinite. The point is that anybody who observes you over a consistent period of time recognizes that when you're lying or when you're bluffing, you will exhibit or communicate certain psychological symbols, like sniffing or whatever it may be. That's the tell. Okay, so the big shots over at the Discovery Channel, the guy, I'd never met him before, but his behavior, I would say that the tell that he exhibited to me that showed me that he wasn't going to play fair and we were moving into a much more intensive unfair inquisition rather than an interview. I would say his tell was, because I could see him, I was seated slightly to his side, and he was raising his tailbone up, his posterior up, just slightly, just a couple inches. He was raising his body up, declining his knees, which caused the physical effect of he appeared larger than he was, and he was trying to, in a subtle way, use his body as a platform by raising himself up arbitrarily, and it was slightly unnatural. That changing of his body posture was his attempt to increase the psychological pressure on me to give in to his demands in the interview. And I would say that was his tell, because he began to do that several times. It was noticeable to me because of how I was seated at the table. And so he kept going around in a circle and coming back to his statement where he tried to get me to use what I wrote in the book, which, by the way, was an exact, what I used in the book as documentation for my statement on the microchip implant was an exact replica, an exact copy of an exact bill put forth by the United States Congress. So my documentation was a congressional document, for crying out loud. So he realized that, because he was smart, I think he was an agent of some kind, he realized that I was not naive as he thought I was, because he bought into my artificial persona of being naive about manipulation in an interview. I think he had a come to Jesus moment where he recognized, hey, this guy, I'm not playing this guy. I think he had a dawning of realization that it was not he who was playing me, but it was I who was playing him. And that's, you have to do this to win in this game because it's vicious. And so when he had that epiphany that I was playing him and not vice versa, he treated me with a new respect, but also an increased hostility. And he upped the confrontational nature of his words to me. But I wouldn't budge, because if I acquiesced to his demands, then the Discovery Channel show On the Mark of the Beast, featuring me as the main guest expert, which I had done 3 different times for the History Channel, proved to be, I didn't give in to his pressure. And so I was prepared. I had already crossed the line where I was prepared to not go along, knowing full well that by not going on, he would very possibly cancel my appearance in the show, or more, cancel the show. I knew this was high stakes, but there was no point in me proceeding as he requested, because you're not winning anything if you're gaining a show which is nothing more than a TV commercial to discredit you. So we both shook hands. He politely called it off. There was the usual pro forma words that perhaps we'll do it again when we both have more time, but that's just a cover. And that was it. And I don't think they ever aired the show or whatever. But to sum it all up, it's better that I did not play ball with him and retained my integrity than I allowed myself to be manipulated and discredited on national TV because I yielded to his pressure. And so that's just something that you have to understand when you're trying to speak the truth to power, so to speak, in a secular, many times often Christian, often anti-Christian, anti-conservative environment. Okay, so way back in 2025, 25 years ago, I'm writing about the human body that have the capacity to broadcast their own electronic signal or receive an electronic signal. And right now, today, all over the alternative media, all over social media, all over mainstream media, there is this massive debate between those that believe that this is possible, those that believe that this is already being used, and those people who try to say that this is nothing more than a conspiracy theory. But I have documentation, once again, going back 25 years, that I published in a book and spoke widely about on mass media all across the nation, where I through documentation from a congressional record and a congressional bill, where I proved that this technology was up and running 25 years ago. And, I go into it in detail. So back to this girl, there's a lot of stuff on economics, trade treaties, all this stuff, Chinese spies in America, which they're all concerned about it now. I wrote about it, for crying out loud, 25 years ago. So she hands in her paper. She uses the footnotes I have, the documentation. Her entire paper is based on my book. She hands it in to the professor. I guess it's an economics class. She hands it in to the professor. And then the professor gives her her grade. She gets an A+ in the class. And she gets an A+ even though she's using my book, Countdown to Armageddon, as the primary source for the economic things, for the basis for cryptocurrency and all the rest of that stuff. So my point is, when I write a book, I constantly hear back from people all kinds of very interesting stories of how this book was read by a college professor and it earned this girl an A+ grade in a secular college. I constantly hear back from people who gave this book to some notable politician or celebrity or some mover and shaker or some pastor or some individual Christians whose life needed to be changed. This is the purpose for why I write the books. And so these books are not just books. They're evangelistic seeds. They're designed to win people over and communicate a biblical worldview. All right, this is Paul McGUIRE. We're going to be back in just a moment. Be sure to visit the paulmcguire.us website. That's paulmcguire.us. And you can get all these books at a discount right now. And these books are evangelistic seeds with great power and great harvest. And let me remind you that every soul that you and I win to Jesus Christ on earth, every soul God keeps a tab of, and you and I will be rewarded at the judgment seat of Christ. We will be rewarded by Jesus Christ for every soul that we saved. And the top award you can get in that area, or the Academy Award level award that you can get in the area of evangelism, is known as the Soul Winner's Crown. So the Soul Winner's Crown just doesn't go to me because I wrote the book and my name's on the book, and people are reading the content in the Bible verses that I quote in the book. No, that would be very unfair of God. The Soul Winner's Crown award is awarded to any person who participated in any way, shape, or form in distributing the books, my prophecy books. In this case, it was Countdown to Armageddon. The Soul Winner's Crown is awarded to anybody who participates in any shape or form in distributing the Soul Winner's Crown. So if you purchased that prophecy book or another prophecy book from me, and you used it to give to your college professor, and you got an A+, and the professor ends up getting saved, or students now look at the book with increased interest because of the A+ you received, and one or two of them come to Jesus Christ, I'm not the only one who gets the Soul Winner's Crown. Every single one of you would get a Soul Winner's Crown, no matter what you did, because whatever you did, you were part of the partnership. You were part of the team that won that individual to Jesus Christ. The tract that you just happened to use was a prophecy book written by me. But look, when people hand out tracts in cities and subways and trains that can potentially lead people to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, they may never hear about the results of their tract that they left in a public place and how the Lord used that tract to save somebody. They may never hear about it here on earth at this time zone. But when they go to the judgment seat of Christ, guess who's going to be called up to be rewarded with the Soul Winner's Crown for having won souls? All the people who were involved in not only writing the tract, printing the tract, distributing the tract, and yes, a Soul Winner's Crown will be handed out to the person who bothered to place the tract in a public place so somebody could come upon it and read it and get saved. So there's a lot of people operating in partnership who will receive the Soul Winner's Crown. Now, a lot of people have a mental problem assimilating the relationship between a prophecy book, which has in it the words that can lead somebody to Jesus Christ, and a tract that can lead somebody to Jesus Christ. They get the understanding that somebody can come to Christ through a tract left on a train or something, and that there's a spiritual reward for that person at the judgment seat of Christ. But listen to me very carefully, all a book is All a prophecy book is a sophisticated and more effective tract than a simple religious tract. So a Bible prophecy book, like the ones that I write, could be classified in the category of a tract. It's just that they're a high-end tract with multiple spiritual warheads. And so when you participate in getting the tract, buying the book, and distributing the book to people, and then people come to Jesus Christ, you are going to get a soul winner's crown of reward, just as if you put a tract on a subway or a train. So whenever you are a partner in evangelism, it's not just the author, the writer, it's not just the talk show host, it's not just the speaker, it's not just the pastor. It's like with this ministry, Paul McGUIRE Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church. Every one of you who participate in any way, shape, or form in helping me, in empowering me, and enabling me to distribute the books, to distribute or continue sending up our Paul McGUIRE audio and video messages all over social media and the internet. All kinds of people come to Christ through the audio and video messages we distribute through the Paul McGUIRE Report. All kinds of people come to Christ who read our books. Millions of people across the world over the last, 10 years have been impacted spiritually because of the books, the programs, the videos, the audios, and everything else we do. So here's the takeaway. When you answer the call of God and you participate in this ministry in any way, shape, or form, by asking God and giving a donation or financial contribution, by obeying God and donating whatever monies God tells you to donate, and then books are printed and distributed, or shows are produced, audio shows, video shows are produced and distributed, and people come to Christ. Guess what? Because you partnered in it, because you partnered by making a financial donation and contribution, you're going to share in the soul winner's crown of reward. Anybody involved it's a team effort. It's not just me, for crying out loud. You're a partner. That's why I call you partners in our ministry. And so you will share in the soul winner's crown award. And so I just want to leave that with you because it's very important that you grasp that concept. This is how we change the direction of America. This is how we overcome the powers of darkness in America, by approaching a person one by one. Yeah, I know we all talk in big numbers, especially those of us that are in media. Yes, collectively I've reached millions and millions of people. That's a fact. But the emphasis has always been on the one-person-to-one-person approach, where even in the programming, I endeavor to talk to one person. I never have sorry folks, but I never have that dumb mentality. You'll never hear Paul McGUIRE say something like, "Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land," as if I'm talking to this mythical mass of people. That reflects a tragic misunderstanding in communication. Whenever I'm before the microphone, whenever I'm before a camera, whenever I'm writing a book, I'm never writing, speaking, or being on camera visually. I'm never communicating to some kind of amorphous, mystical, giant group of unknown people. I'm never communicating to some unknown masses of people. I'm never communicating to, quote, all those out there in Radio Land. That's something from the 1930s. I was trained, and the Holy Spirit trained me to think in this precise manner. When I write a book, I'm writing it in a personal way. I'm writing it from me to you. When I speak in a microphone, I'm speaking from me to you. When I speak to a video camera, I'm speaking from me to you. It's always personal. It's always one-on-one. That's why, by God's grace, we're so effective, because it's personal. And to give you an idea, I have had countless numbers of people over the years come up to me, and they always say similar things. What they say is, "We thank God for your program, Paul." And it always sounds like when we're listening to you or reading your books or watching you, it always sounds like you're talking directly to us personally. You never sound like some detached machine. There's always this sense of you know who we are, and you're talking to us on a one-to-one basis. You're talking to us personally. And I consider that the greatest compliment, because that is the sign, by God's grace, that you're an effective communicator. All right, we're going to be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. pray for me that I would always hear the Lord in regards to how to communicate, how to write a book. Right now, I'll be honest with you, I have been agonizing. I have been struggling over which book to write, what content to place in the book, the style of the book. I've been praying, seeking God, crying out to God for years now, because it's been years since I wrote my last book. Why? Because I have realized that the world does not need just another book. I don't need to write just another book. I've written a ton of books. My burden, which I believe is from the Lord, is to write a book that will really affect change. And I need to hear from the Lord directly regarding, Lord, what content should I put in the book? What should be the theme of the book? What should be the title of the book? What should be the message of the book? What is most needed for your people and people that needed to be saved? And until the Lord gives me his directions with great clarity in all of those areas, I'm not going to write a book. I would rather wait and seek the Lord and wait until I get a very clear confirmation from God than to just churn out another book. Okay? But I can't, look, I need your help. I need your prayers. It's very hard to do what I'm doing. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm just telling you it's hard. You face rejection everywhere. Yeah, you're kind of treated like a celebrity in certain select quarters. But when you go out to the world and you espouse ideas that you know they don't like, but you need to tell them as best you can in love, you've got to communicate it anyway. You know what I'm talking about. They turn up the heat against you. Even your brothers in Christ will turn up the heat against you. So I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for myself. But I need your prayers. I need your spiritual warfare. I need your donations. And I need you to be an activist. For crying out loud, it is getting, the battle I have to face is not giving in to the temptation to be weary. But I'm tempted to be weary when I see my numbers of viewers and likers and watchers rigged. I know they're rigged, especially Rumble. Rumble is rigging me hardcore. I know they have this great reputation for being a place where conservatives to go, and they are, to some degree. But why is it that currently, in the last 3 months, there's been an amazing change? My YouTube numbers are way, way beyond my Rumble numbers. Now, if Rumble was truly providing a haven, a safe haven for conservative and Christian voices, why is it that YouTube has now changed their algorithms and I'm reaching, like, I don't know, 5 times, 7 times as many people on YouTube or more? I don't know the exact count. How is that possible? Because somebody is rigging the system, because somebody doesn't want the biblical message to be proclaimed. So I need your prayers. Okay, this is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, bottom line. Why is this important? Okay, bottom line. Why is all this important? Well, let's just get right down to it. It's important because what I've discovered through my own personal research, and it seems to be affirmed by certain other sources of research that has integrity, is the following. When I talk to a person, when I listen to somebody write an article or do a video or appear on social media or meet somebody in person, usually I can tell in a matter of minutes, if not seconds, what that person's behaviors are going to be, what their belief systems are going to be, their politics, and a whole list of characteristics. You can usually tell based on what? Based on the following. Whatever media sources that an individual is plugged into. Now, this is very important because this will save you a lot of time and it's very, very accurate. Whatever media sources that an individual is plugged into. So, for example, if an individual, any given individual, is plugged into primarily and exclusively, let's say, mainstream media, mainstream film, mainstream television, and that would be heavily weighted towards mainstream episodic television, mainstream sources of communication on the internet again. If a person is plugged into those media outlets, then they have plugged themselves in, whether they know it or not. The following will result from what they were plugged into. they will become, in terms of their consciousness, their worldview, their perception of reality, their political opinions, all of those things inevitably follow with 100% mathematical certainty. They automatically follow whatever it is that they're plugged into, because whatever it is that they're plugged into becomes, for all practical purposes, it becomes their bottom line reality. Everything else follows. Everything else follows whatever it is they're plugged into. So when I talk to somebody, and these are the primary ways you can discover exactly what it is a person is plugged into. And people don't understand how much they reveal about themselves. They think that they're being secretive or guarded or whatever. But their house is literally an open door once you know what it is that they're plugged into in terms of media outlets. So, and also when you're plugged in heavily to one media outlet of a particular category, the chances are very great that the one so-called individual media outlet that you happen to be plugged into is really a kind of a forerunner, and they don't have to reveal it to you, but you can make a projection based on their acknowledgement or your discovery of the one media outlet that they're connected to or plugged into. Then what automatically follows, and yeah, it's almost like automatic all the time. What automatically follows is that the other additional media outlets that they're plugged into will all be mirrors or clones or replicas of the original media outlet you discovered they were plugged into. In other words, whenever a person is plugged into, let's say, a liberal, atheistic, socialistic type of media outlet, like CNN would be an example, like CBS would be an example, if they are heavy consumers of that liberal media outlet, then it basically automatically follows that they're also and simultaneously going to be plugged into CBS-type movies, CBS-type news shows, CNN, which is a cheaper model of CBS, and they will automatically gravitate towards those music stars, those pop stars, those country rock stars, those movie stars or whatever. The fact that they're plugged into the CBS media primarily will indicate to you the following, that they're plugged in also to all these other media outlets, like certain performers and certain TV and certain movies, et cetera, because once they have demonstrated to you their high degree of liking certain media outlets, then they're going to search out for other media outlets that are basically playing the same tune. By playing the same tune, I mean they're essentially echoing the refrain of the first primary liberal, socialist, collectivist, democratic, whatever you want to call it, mindset. The fact that they're plugged into one indicates to you that there's a very high likelihood that the fact that they're plugged into one means that they're simultaneously plugged into a multiplicity of media outlets that all share the same vibe, if you will. So this is a massive indicator of what a person's politics, sexuality, ideology, theology, belief systems, all the kinds of things that you might want to know about a person can be discovered primarily by finding out what is their primary media outlet. And then you can kind of confirm it by finding out what their other primary media outlets are that they're plugged into. And you will see with an amazing percentage accuracy that the very first fundamental, which is like being plugged into a CBS type outlet, means that they're plugged into every kind of clone of CBS, performer, TV show, film, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, if they sample one hors d'oeuvre, chances are they're going to eat the entire meal. If they don't sample the one hors d'oeuvre and eat the one hors d'oeuvre on a regular basis, then chances are conversely that they're not going to be plugged into all those extra additional clone media outlets. Are you tracking with me? This is important because this will simplify for you, intensively simplify for you what a person thinks, what a person believes, what a person's actions, voting, You name it. Whatever you want to know about a person will almost overwhelmingly be determined by whatever it is that their primary plugging into in terms of a media outlet is. So what does it mean? Now we're going to break it down further. Once you understand this, once you master this principle, you will have the uncanny ability of basically, in other people's eyes, you'll have the uncanny ability of predicting with 100% certainty what it is a person believes, acts on, thinks, perceives, rejects, accepts, the whole ball of wax. You'll be able to determine it all by simply knowing the first step in determining what they think and believe, which is what primary media outlet are they plugged into. And then you just go from there, and it's smooth sailing. Okay, so let's review this simple formula for determining where a person is at in life, for lack of better words. How do you determine where a person is at in life if you don't have all the information? Well, you don't need all the information. You just need a small amount of information, and you can leverage that small amount of information into a comprehensive understanding of what a person is all about. Now, it is so important to instill this in all of us and educate others. So here's an additional example based on the first one. Again, you're not going to know everything about an individual, but every individual, if you're interacting with them, even if it's just occasionally, every individual leaves a series of very important clues that will tell you where the buried treasure is, so to speak. By buried treasure, I mean that will tell you what they're really all about as a person, what they really believe as a person. So, for example, in my line of work, which is very difficult to codify into a simple sentence, but you know what my line of work is, or you wouldn't be listening to me. In my line of work, I will often meet people in society, regular society, occasionally the higher levels of society or whatever, and especially in the higher levels of society, or even the medium levels of society, especially at those levels, people will often pretend or represent themselves to be such and such or so for the purpose of making money, getting clients, furthering their career. Most careers, or at least a large percentage of careers, depend in one way or another upon getting people to believe in you and getting people to like you. So, for example, if you're trying to sell a product in a heavily Democratic neighborhood and you're driving around in a van with a giant MAGA sign, a giant picture of Donald Trump, and a giant American flag, and your prospective clients happen to see your ultra conservative Republican van, well, guess what? You already know the answer. It could present a problem. It could be a stumbling block to you getting new clients and getting new sales. And that would be the same if you were a lawyer, an attorney, if you owned a restaurant or whatever. Your brand can generate customers or repulse prospective customers. So in Southern California, especially in subcultures that are filled with what are called Christians of various kinds, or pseudo-conservatives of various kinds. That's what Southern California and a lot of California is filled with. You have to be very careful. People will attend churches. People will attend gatherings of Christians. People will be part of families, and they will represent themselves as conservatives, as sharing your political beliefs. They will represent themselves essentially in a tailored image designed to get you to think that they're one of you. And that's how they make a living. Now, while all this is going on, they have a private world that you don't see, a private world in which they interact, in which they reveal their real selves. And so you may discover, not all the time, but some of the time, you may discover that in their real world, where they reveal their real selves, they're on the opposite side politically. They're heavily Democratic, they're heavily liberal. They espouse liberal democratic ideas. They use the slogans of liberal democrats and so on and so forth. So which is the real person? Well, only they know, because they're hiding it. Now, let's say you're considering them for something. And most people, or many people, they don't make decisions like who they're going to use as a plumber based on politics or whatever, usually. But sometimes the position that's available gives a person great power and control of information on a much larger level. So you're not allowed to ask people, point blank stuff. So you got to find out clues. You listen carefully to how they talk. And even if they're masquerading as a conservative, the chances are, if you're spending any time with them at all, they're going to slip out and reveal their true selves, their true politics over a period of time. Because nobody, unless they're a professional intelligence agent or something, nobody can keep up under scrutiny and examination constantly. Sooner or later, they kind of slip up. And so you're trying to gather information, and information that doesn't seem important at the time will come back into your mind when it's needed. So a person, you may be at a social gathering and a person slips out one sentence, but the one sentence reveals something about their politics, their belief system, or their belief on a particular important subject. And they reveal something about themselves in a way that they never had before. And you immediately grab it and say, that's odd. I wonder if that person believes such and such or is such and such, because all of a sudden they have revealed to you, by accident, they've revealed to you that they don't necessarily really believe things the way they're pretending they do. So you don't reject somebody or accept somebody on the basis of one statement. What you're looking for is a series of trends, a series of revealing statements. And then you can add additional components, like if they say they're going to go to a concert and they go to a concert, who's the performer at the concert? That will tell you a lot about an individual, because for most people to spend money on concert tickets is sizable these days. And so people are generally not going to spend money on a performance artist, rock star, music star, whatever, unless they kind of identify with that star in a multitude of ways. So you take note of that. In other words, you're gathering notes of information, and then you're going to make an incremental decision. Okay, so then you meet a friend of the person that we're talking about. And the friend doesn't have any investment in pretending to be something that they're not. And so the friend perhaps has been schooled into the fact that you're a Christian and conservative, and the friend has been warned, be careful what you say around so-and-so. But the friend really represents more of the true character of the person we're talking about. So as you talk to the friend, even casually, the friend is not as invested, and the friend, when you're conversing with him or her, slips out a number of bits of information regarding concerts, books they read, TV shows they like, a comment about so-and-so as a social figure, et cetera, et cetera. And now you just don't have one piece of information. Let's say you have 6 or 7. And all these 6 or 7 pieces of information spoken to you by the friend, who's a little bit more careless in terms of divulging information. But all of these 6 or 7 pieces of information seem to indicate that this friend of the person you're evaluating is extremely liberal, which would be a contradiction to the way that person is representing themselves. And then you look for other behaviors and where they went on vacation and what they did on vacation. Whatever they're coming forward with, whatever information they're coming forward with is potentially a clue. It's potentially a bit of information that you can potentially use to assemble a more coherent and clear and, most importantly, accurate picture of where this person is coming from. Okay? Now, you don't misconstrue this as a lesson in social paranoia, because that's not what this is about. This is not about you acting like some kind of society big brother or big sister who has to evaluate anyone, and if they don't meet up to your tenets of evaluation, that you're going to reject them. That's generally not how people who claim to be Christians and true conservatives behave. I would say, and I don't think it's a statement coming from bias, but that seems to be more of the way that people on the liberal side of things seem to behave. Now, I know I'll be criticized for saying that, but I've mixed with both sides during my lifetime. And right or wrong, in terms of whether you like it or not, that has been my experience. So I can't lie to you and tell you my experience has been something other than what it is or was. So, how do we utilize this? The way we utilize this is the following. And before we get into that, I just want to briefly give you an example of perhaps the single most powerful category of needed evaluation at work in our world today, at work in our society today. And this is meant specifically for those people who call themselves Christians, some call themselves Christians or conservatives, although anybody could apply these principles. This is important, not because you're trying to be a spy or commit espionage on people that you know or you interact with. Again, this is not supposed to be, an exercise in paranoia. That's not the point. If that's what you're getting out of it, you might as well just move on. When I meet and interact with several generations of relatively young people through several generations, and if these young people went to Christian schools, Christian schools, etc., or even if they didn't, let's say they went to public schools, but they had a relatively strong base of support from a Christian church and their parents, etc. Those groups of young people who were raised in a more Christian environment know what the expectations are, what the standards are for a Christian, because it was taught to them. So, in these cases, most of the time, the parents, the mother or father or the single parent or whatever, did their best to raise their children to be Christians and to believe, act, and behave like Christians, okay? And that usually involves the acceptance of some percentage of a conservative belief system. So they know how to dress, they know how to speak, they know what to say, they know what not to say, they know what behaviors to admit to, like sexual behaviors, and they know what behaviors to pretend they were never involved in and to hide. They know how to, with great expertise, they know how to play the game of the Christian adult who was raised by a Christian parent. They know what the expectations and the standards are, especially from their parents and their parents' friends who are Christians of one sort or of another. So they know what is expected of them. They know what they should believe, act, etc., etc. So many times, not all the time, but many times, by the time the child graduates college, especially a secular college, but it can happen in a Christian college, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen a great deal of the time. By the time a young adult has graduated, a secular college or whatever, there's a large percentage or a disturbing percentage of those children who have distanced themselves from their faith or are in a place of doubt and questioning about their faith due to the social indoctrination and the mind control embedded in the educational system. Their faith, their authentic, legitimate Christian faith has largely been undermined. So there's a percentage of Christian young adults who are living lives and lifestyles, and they secretly have belief systems that probably would be more comfortable in a secular society, in a secular liberal environment, in a democratic environment. But they are going to put on an act, and sometimes they'll rebel and just tell their parents to go blanket. But many times they will, around their parents, pretend that they are more Christian in belief and action than they really are. So they act. They manufacture a character. The character is them, and the goal of the character is to deceive or fool their parents into thinking that they're far more Christian than in actuality they really are. And this game is going on right now in millions of households in America alone. And I'm not throwing stones at people here. I'm just simply making an observation of a reality. So, every parent, especially Christian and conservative parents, but every parent wants to believe in their heart that their child is everything that they hoped their child would be in terms of the child's beliefs and actions, and in terms of the child's faith or lack of faith in Christ. So, a lot of parents just buy into and accept in an unquestioning manner the show or the performance that's being put on by their Christian or conservative children, because that gives them a momentary sense of peace of mind, it gives them a sense of satisfaction, and it gives them a certain equilibrium and peace of mind. But that is not really good for anybody. Because if you don't accurately know what your child believes, what your child's behavior is, even after your child is no longer a child, but they're an adult, you're relating to a deception, and you can't be used by God to help heal and help undo some of the programming they were embedded with in a secular society and a secular school system. So what do? If you will take the time to learn the specific set of skills that I've been discussing with you in terms of seeking out reliable evidence and then finding the reliable evidence in order to make a conclusion, in order to accurately understand who your young adult or adult child has really become. And the only way you can do this is you have to put the brakes on this human need to just blindly accept everything you're being told, and learn how to, in a non-paranoiac, in a being a pesty parent sense, in a non-being a nagging parent sense, in a non-being a nosy parent sense, learning how, because that's going to be dynamite and blow up the relationship. You can't go there. No matter how much you're tempted to go there, it's counterproductive. Forget about it. Don't even go there. What you have to learn is the skill. Not the desire. You already have the desire to help your child. You have to learn the skills of finding out who they really are and who they've really become. So you're going to train yourself how to see the evidence right before your very eyes so that you can make an accurate conclusion as to who your adult, once upon a time it was a child, who your adult offspring have become. So you do what I said a few minutes ago. You learn how to really listen. You learn how to really see. You learn how to observe without commenting their behavior, their words, the behavior of their friends and words. And you will begin to see, if you shut your mouth, you will begin to see all kinds of very subtle patterns, all kinds of very subtle evidence that will telegraph to you, obscure word I know, that will transmit to you who they have become. So when they tell you you went to a concert, you could ask in a non-critical, non-nosy manner, oh, what concert did you see? And depending upon the group or the singer or the performer they saw, it could potentially be a clue as to what their lifestyle or beliefs are all about. And then, when you're interacting and listening, you're not just listening to what they're saying. You're listening to breaks in the download of information they're pre-selecting to give you. And often, most people in a variety of situations, when they're blabbing away or they're reacting to something and then starting to blab away, they might give you a one-sentence clue as to what potentially they may really believe, not just a sentence designed to make you think that they believe things like you do. You're waiting for that uncensored remark by them, which is a clue as to what they really believe. So there may be a brief, heated discussion about some current event, moral issue. And they may leak out like a sentence or a half sentence and then quickly distance themselves from it. But you don't forget about what they said because you heard it when they first said it and you thought it was odd. What they were telling you, potentially, is what they really believe, not what they are trying to sell you into thinking that they believe. You're looking for evidence of what they really believe, and they'll leak it out over time. You've got to be patient. Over time, they'll leak it out. They'll say it. It'll come up one way or another way. You know, if they read books, it might be the kind of book they bought. People, when you hang around people long enough, people will always eventually reveal stuff about themselves that can provide the all-important clues you need into discovering who they really are, what their behavior is really all about, and what they have become spiritually, politically, you know, and everything else. You're not doing this because you're the moral policeman of the world. You're not doing this because you're a spy for Jesus. For crying out loud, if you adapt that mentality, you're dead in the water, man. It's over before it began. All you're looking for is you're sifting for some clues. And if you wait over a period of time and don't bite into the temptation to stick your nose nosily into everybody's business, but learn how to pull back instead of pulling forward and being all clingy, once you master that skill, they will hand deliver to you with TLC, tender loving care, the little bites of information you need to kind of find out who they really are. Now, when you find out who they really are, you might be a little bit shocked. You might be a little bit disappointed. Avoid like the plague the temptation to blab out how disappointed you are. Stop giving into the temptation of baiting them to spill the beans and give you some kinds of confessional. Forget all that stuff. Shut up. Again, I say shut up and listen. And then over time, pray, gather wisdom, and develop a workable strategic strategy to address the primary issues of your concern and what you can do to positively, in a non-controlling way, influence them to recommit to the truth of the Word of God, obviously, but on a higher level. Don't fall prey to the traps that are all over the place. Okay? It's not that hard. It's not that hard. So don't make it hard in your mind. It's not hard. It's easy. It's the only reason it appears hard is you haven't tried it yet. When you try it, you will be amazed how you would develop your skills. And you will be amazed that these skills in listening and gathering information and the skill of listening intensely and the skill of being silent instead of being in blabbing mode, you will discover how much social skills power this gives you in all kinds of environments, in family, in society, on the job, etc., etc. You will find that you will have inherited through choice a kind of Superman or Superwoman ability to navigate in once were turbulent waters. You will not find them turbulent because you will be skilled and strategic. Okay, so what's the bottom line? Whenever you talk to somebody, depending upon what social media, what media they're plugged into, that will determine almost 100% who they really are, not who they are pretending to be before your eyes, but once you know somebody's primary social media that they're plugged into, that will tell you volumes about what they believe, what their behavior is, and on and on and on. And I can tell you, just to save you a lot of headache, not in all cases, but in a large percentages of the cases, you will inevitably find that your child or this adult that you're listening to has inevitably become more liberal, more questioning of moral values, doubtful and weakened in their faith in Jesus Christ, etc., etc. Now, how do I know that? I don't know you're the person we're talking about. How do I know that? Because the entire system that we live in, the world system that we live in, has been set up intentionally for the purpose of programming, brainwashing, implementing scientific mind control on millions and millions of young people through education, through media, and all kinds of other social systems. In other words, there's a reason why everybody is flowing in the same direction. It's not because millions of people are simultaneously discovering the truth. It's because there is an invisible, but globally comprehensive, invisible social programming network functioning, a educational mind control system functioning all over the world that has been put in place. And it's an organized system, and it has a history to it, and it has financiers that go along with it. And it's being done deliberately through planning and intentional. The human race and planet Earth is moving in a particular direction. That movement is not accidental or coincidental. That movement is planned. And that brings you into the deeper knowledge that we talk about all the time on the Paul McGUIRE Report, what I've written about it's extensively in my books. That brings us in to secret historical societies, secret groups, and all kinds of secret management control structures that are embedded in human civilization. Okay, this is Paul McGUIRE. We can change the world together, by the way. It's doable, especially now. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Stand with us with your financial donations and contributions. Stand with us as a prayer warrior. Stand with us in helping us spread the word. Protect our numbers, which are being rigged constantly. Stand with us, and if we operate in unity, biblical unity, we can change the world. God bless you. This is Paul McGUIRE. Visit paulmcguire.us.